Hi, hello, good evening, everyone. I'm happy to start the event tonight, the Urban Shift, first time in the form of a panel discussion. My name is Anette Vanaga, and I'm a newcomer to Urban Institute. Me and Indra Purs, who is in the audience today, we have joined the Urban Institute this summer. But I'm happy that on the stage I have Jonas, who is one of the co-founders and actually one of the creators, together with Margareta Voloshin, of the Urban Shift events that they have been running for about 7 years now, since the very beginning of the organization. And so I'm happy to kind of take part in it, this time in a slightly new form. And today we are talking about, we will be talking about sharing the knowledge and experience for urban development, networks across boundaries. And we will start with a short impulse, an introduction by Ute Meyer. Yes, is that the right pronunciation? And the conversation will be, I think we will hear from Ute a very nice opening that will give us all a very clear understanding of where this conversation is headed. But a little hint that I would like to give from my side is that it is about way how we are thinking about urbanity and urban living and urban lifestyles, and perhaps we can see it in a new cooperative ways. But before we start with Ute's presentation, maybe I can hand the microphone around so everyone on the stage can introduce themselves, so we know who are we here today.
So, good evening. My name is Gunter Suskos. I'm working for Riga City Development Department. I'm mostly dealing with strategic planning issues. I'm as a leader for preparing a new city development strategy. Now I'm and my colleagues preparing new city development program, and yes, I have another topics what we are dealing in my office regarding to neighborhoods, regarding to metropolitan area, another strategic issue.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Guido Secchi. I'm a researcher in human geography at the Department of Human Geography at the University of Latvia. My main interests are related to social dynamics in urban and regional settings. And I'm also involved in consulting and cultural projects related to urban transformation, basically, mostly in the post-Soviet context.
Yeah, hi. Annette already introduced me very nicely. I'm one of the co-founders of the Urban Institute, next to the other ones who are here, more or less. Not all, I hope still somebody comes. Myself, I am a social worker, working for the last 25 years in social planning and cultural planning, in the last specific, let's say, 4 years more and more in cultural planning, specifically with European Capital of Cultures. Probably that's it for here and now. You're great. Great.
Well, Annette also introduced me already. I'm Ute Meyer. I come from the south of Germany, from a very small city, and I'm an architect and urban planner by upbringing, and I teach urban planning and design at a very small school, which is situated very close to where this image comes from.
So, should we continue with your short introduction and some images to...
Okay, so I already said this is an image that comes from the area where my school is and where I live and where the research I'm doing is based. Actually, I thought this morning, if you squeeze your eyes, although we are not close to anything like cultural heritage, this could also be Riga in terms of distribution of settlement and landscape and water. And where we live, this is also an area where this all very nicely comes together. I have another image. Everybody knows that, well, everybody talks about world population is growing and all these people are pouring into large urban areas. So this is an image that is basically visualizing these data, you know, that the world population is growing and urban areas, urban metropolis are growing. But although it is purely visualizing of data, it is still not an innocent image because it can be read twofold, I think. It can be one story it tells us that the cities are the ones who have to somehow deal with resiliency issues because it's all the people are there. So if they fail, everything fails. That's the one point. But there's also a very other, a different point. It's also a different an image of power in a way because it also tells us this is where the attractors are. So forget about the rest. People who say that very strong, oh, this is an image that goes along with that sort of thought on urbanity. This is the classical image of the European style on the left hand, or, well, no, right hand, and more like extra European style. This is what cities look like, don't they? So there's opposition to this coming from, for example, people like Neil Brenner, who's teaching in Harvard, and I know that you can't see much on this image, albeit that's all about flows. And he and his research institute would make the point that it's not only about the huge growth centers and that it's not true really, that it's only the large knots that are urban and accumulating all the forces, but that urbanization of the world is a much larger issue. So if we look into Central Europe, and I know that Riga isn't on it, but I want to make a point about the center of Europe because it's very explicit there. So instead of looking at all the big label cities, London, Brussels, Berlin, Warsaw, we could just as well look at the red stuff in between, which is my suggestion for tonight. And there's a strong corridor, let's say, in Central Europe from the UK over Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Rhine Valley, south of Germany, where the little red circle is, all the way through Switzerland and to Milan, where that pattern of rather polycentric urban territories that neither have the large, true metropolis, but neither do they have pure countryside, where this is omnipresent. So if we focus for a moment on the area where the red little circle is, I want to show you a complicated looking Excel sheet. I borrowed it from the LSE, the London School of Economics, that have also made the global mapping of all the large areas, and that's a sheet that they produced to compare basically the large growth poles globally, like London or New York City or Mumbai or Bogota or you name it, Lagos. So except the green line, the other two, London and Berlin, would come from them and evaluate data like in the first column, it's the population, in the second column, it's the area that is covered, and the third is the density measurement, and then further on, where the person is with the dollar sign, it's about the GDP in that area, and all the way in the back, car possession and carbon dioxide emissions in that area. So we made the little joke comparing what I call the urban land, and I'm going to show you which area it is, to the figures of London and Berlin. And you see, and it's quite funny in some cases, that the urban land in terms of population, 16 million, is a bit more than London, but that's, well, let's just put it, it's a similar amount of people spread over a larger area, of course, with the density, which is much, much slower and ridiculous in comparison to London, of course, and which calls out, we are sprawl. But if you look at the GDP performance of the same area, it's quite urban. Because it equals equals London and even surpasses Berlin. This is very rough, I know, but it's just to make the point. Car possession is bad, and carbon dioxide emissions are bad as well. So it's true that they cover more land, and they are not as well performing as inner city cores. But as there are many people already, and as there can be assumption made about these areas, it's worth talking about. So I very briefly look at two angles. I first look at from the non-metropolitan angle, and then I look from the metropolitan angle very briefly, and then I want to discuss with you. So if we look at from Oberschwaben, which is where this area is, this is supposedly not urban at all. This is how it looks. all the little knots and bits and pieces and a lot of infrastructure. As it happens, the infrastructure, train infrastructure is being modernized in this. I don't know if you can see this here. No, well, yeah, you can. Here somewhere, and connection. This is Stuttgart, between Stuttgart and Munich. Train is running much faster. And you have another connection here, that just as a background. So supposedly, this is what we think of when we talk about Oberschwaben and being in a rural area, small towns and medieval cores and all very nice and tidy. But this is how it looks in reality if you zoom out a little bit, and the nice little town is here somewhere. So could we not is what we ask in one research project, given that, and I can, if needed, explain it further on, later on, what it means that the infrastructure is modernized. The train connections to the large metropolitan areas like Stuttgart, Zurich, and Munich are going to be much faster, more efficient, and more resilient in the future. Could we not pour part of our housing demand, affordable housing demand, into this area, densifying it, instead of having it pour into the large metropolis that are overheated in terms of real estate already? So this is one question. If you look at it from the non-urban world, if we look at it from the urban world, I have, the counterpart in a way, and I want to make the point about Brussels, which is an area we're also doing a project on at the moment. So this is Brussels. It's a map on the social conditions in Brussels. Red is not as wealthy, and blue is wealthier. Education, GDP is all in the background. So there's a split that runs through Brussels. But albeit that we are looking, this is like a real urban tissue a city is supposed to look like, right? This is not surprising. This is Brussels. But if we look at a specific area we are working on at the moment, this is what it looks like, and it's not that different from what I've showed you before. I'm sure everybody would agree on that. So this is a specific area, former military territory, we are looking at the moment, and there are two parties involved. This is the Flemish region on one part and the Brussels capital region on the other, because the territory is split and half of it belongs to the Brussels capital region, the other belongs to the Flemish region, and the Flemish region wants to have a forest in the former territory of the military, a forest, that's it, and Brussels wants an urban park. I forgot to say that also in that Oberschwaben, that non-metropolitan area, of course, there are numerous boundaries between municipal areas. So if we're talking about pouring housing there in a large scale, we would have them working together. And also these guys in Brussels, if they want to do something about their former military territory, they got to somehow work together. Whereas we do have leading ideas and visions about the city, the urban, and the landscape around. With the Charter of Leipzig, for example, we do not have that for this tissue, which is my argument, and we might close with this image, which I've already shown this morning. This is photographs from the area in South Germany I was talking about, where I come from, and photographs from Berlin. And I bet you don't know which one comes from where, and I will not tell you, and that's my point.
Thank you. Maybe we can still use the microphone to pass it over. Before we do move on, because urban land is your concept that you have been working on, could you clarify so it's clear for everyone how exactly you formulated the urban land, and intermediate density would be the other question for me.
Shall I do that? Well, intermediate density is actually a term that doesn't come from me. It's a term that comes from the European Union. I'm not an expert on European policies, but as far as I know, they have reformed their data mapping, their quantitative density mapping in the recent past. They had a condition where different nations reported their density findings or their density statistics to the European Union, and they would map the different reports into one big image. But the methodology in each nation was different. How they would come, what resulted to be urban and what resulted to be non-urban territory. So what has happened in the last, I think, since 2014, is that also due to new technologies, there is a reformed way of mapping density throughout Europe, and it's a bifold strategy that still picks up the reports from each nation, but on the other hand, via satellite monitoring is certain. They cover Europe with a grid, basically, and if you look at from a satellite perspective, you see how many houses are in that rectangle of the grid. So you calculate is that if there's a certain density, it accounts for being urban. If it's not, it accounts for being rural or in between. So said that, they have come up with different maps that look a bit different from what they used to look. And there are areas that are truly urban and really dense. There are areas that are really remote and rural. And there's a lot of urbanized areas that are neither nor, but still have a certain density, which appear to be much more than with the former way of mapping the data. It's more or less the thing that I've shown about the red stuff. It's not exact. That's not the map. It's a different map. But the idea is that you have corridors of worldwide as well, that don't fall into a classical category of being a dense city, but are neither countryside, and they are not all sprawl. That's the point. They are all sorts of things. They can be sprawl, they can be not, networks and clusters of these smaller and medium-sized cities. They can be fringes of metropolitan areas. They all quantitatively have that intermediate density. But then if you look at the true physical spaces, if you look at Brussels or if you look at Oberschwaben, like again, also Biberach, in a specific city there, you would probably do different things, although they share the same quantitative density. But my point is just that there's a lot of this territory and we don't really have a clear idea what to do about it. And urban land is the same thing, basically, but it has it's a label of sorts, but it's also maybe the qualitative side of it, because the quantitative side is just measuring density. So if I say urban land, there's the idea behind it that I say, well, it's both. It should, or it could have the qualities that we associate with being urban, and could have the qualities that we associate with being land. Be that physical in terms of physical space, or be that social, or be that cultural, or ecological, or whatever. That's what I hope we maybe talk about tonight. Yeah.
Thank you. Maybe if you pass over the microphone to Jonas, who already saw the presentation in the morning, the extended version, and probably has had more time to think about these issues and reflect them, and think about local examples as a person who has worked with communities, and not just in Riga but also beyond. How would you describe the patterns that Ute mentioned, the clusters, the urban land and cooperation between different clusters of different urbanities? What is the local situation with that? What are the patterns? What sort of collaborations or dynamics you see there?
First of all, I mean, I need to make one point here, as the presentation of Ute today in Technical University was kind of a little bit, I hope I don't touch that too extreme, but kind of a little bit mind-blowing. Because I was sitting there listening to you, and I thought, why the heck you didn't appear 5 years earlier? It would have supported us enormously. But probably 5 years earlier, also in other parts of Europe, time wasn't there yet for that. So probably we all needed to, first of all, come to these conclusions that you were pointing out, and in a way also we have been pointing out in a few certainly smaller projects. But what we did find out, and I think this is a little bit what you're referring to also, Now I would be much more in the need to give the mic further on, but Sabine is not sitting here, I'm sitting here, so I'm talking about it, and Guntas can also talk about it since he was also part of the project. We have had a very interesting project running here, not only interesting, I think it was something seriously, yeah, as the name comes along with it, it was really changing. The name of the program was Change. It was run by the region of Riga. It was not a city council project, nor an NGO project or whatsoever. It was a regional project. And we were specifically focusing not only on Pia Riga. I mean, I have to explain to you what means Pia Riga. Pia Riga is the absolute circle around Riga, but we were also going in the far more distant part of the region, which is not anymore the sprawl. It's really like out. It's seriously rural. In this project, we realized something significant, which is enormously important, talking very practically about the communities in itself, as you were asking, Aneta. We realized that the attention towards change management and the idea of actually using so-called social design patterns. Everybody knows I don't like this term very much, so I'm a bit careful with it. But nevertheless, let's keep it there as that. Using social design patterns in order to actually change also public services. And that was very interesting. At the same time as we were like supporting public services, we were also supporting the community activists. And I need to say all of this was in the framework of an Urbact project. So we had partners all around Europe, and lead partner was Eindhoven. Interesting was that nearly all of the partners had completely different reasons why they were joining this project. But there was one significant point that, to my mind, all of them had in common, and that was exactly that they have been fallen in this gap. The gap that you described, the gap of not being seriously on the mental landscape of the European Union, not being on the kind of idea of what are we? And coming back to that, what you explained in your very short introduction, I have to say that this is a fact talking about Germany, just as an example, but the same is for France, and the same speaks for Italy. And as far as I know, also for the UK, probably not England, but the UK, the majority of people in Germany and in Central Europe are living not in the huge urbanized areas. They are living in towns like my hometown exactly, which is of one of these peripheric situations of the rural area, with around 40 to 60, 70,000 people. This is the majority of inhabitants of Germany, of France, of Italy. So we are not talking about these enormously developed, huge million hubs. We are actually talking about small, tiny, unimportant pitches somewhere at the end of the world. This is how the people feel very often, unfortunately, in these communities. And at the same time, they feel really neglected. It's a quite of interesting point. And what I saw in our change project here, and this is a statement I made earlier today in our Ute's lecture in the Technical University. What I found out, and I think all of us who were part of the change project, we actually are at the point, meanwhile here in Latvia, that we have to stand up with a real pride and to say like, guys, girls, we actually have found out something. We have some good results in regional development. We have very, very active, smallest communities. I mean, think about Jaunpils, Guntas. I mean, this is like a community of 2,500 inhabitants, I think, in a huge dimension also, territorial. It's a huge territory. It's a huge city and municipality. And I mean, active up to the edge. You can't imagine that. I would dream of something like this in Central Europe, because those places are very often without hope, without anything, no optimism, just like down, 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 shrinking, shrinking, shrinking. And Jaunpils tries the opposite, and other communities as well, with which we are working. So I think what was very interesting is that in the same time, Riga, represented also by Gunters and his colleagues, was also part of the project. So it was suddenly very much perfectly designed by the Rudolfs and Sabine, I have to say, by the region. It was suddenly something that was really like this mingling in between the real rurality and the real urbanity. And I found that so, how to say, culturally also so important in order to give a voice to this in between, this 50 or 150 shades of gray, which are in between the hub, this like prospering. Ute said today, what a magnificent town, Riga. Yeah, it is. It's a great town. It's very lively. It's wonderful. We all enjoy it. And then there is this countryside. And we all enjoy the countryside. We love it. Latvians or non-Latvians, doesn't matter. We know where we are. We love to live there. We love to see it. But we do not try to build culturally the space in between. I think that is what I found in this change project, that there is a potential that Latvia and this, our small, tiny project, has to give somewhere to the West. This was what I said today, lunchtime. We actually should export a bit something of our work and thinking somewhere to Central Europe, because they fail in that way, seriously.
And I think it's a good point to move on to next panel participant, Gunters. And I would like to acknowledge the fact that we're actually on the stage here. The way we selected the participants is to have an NGO, a member from NGO, a member from university, and a decision maker. So apart from the fact that you've already, as Jonas mentioned, have worked on the Change Urbect project together, I think it's an interesting question also. If we think about these different types of urbanities, then how do you think how Riga can benefit from it politically on a global scale? But perhaps you already have some comments to what Jonas and Ute already said without this question.
Yes, I can return with Ute's presentation. You show maps that urbanity in the world is growing and explaining, but some places in Europe, in the world, are growing, some shrinking. And our state is face shrinking phenomena, and it is a very, very big challenge for us, and for not only for Riga, but for Baltic countries, some countries in Eastern Europe. And yes, only small parts in Latvia as metropolitan area of capital cities are growing. Therefore, some challenges are common with, for instance, Germany or Netherlands metropolitan areas, but some is different for us as a post-communist country and city. So, Jonas mentioned Project Change, and that's, of course, it was involved different stakeholders. For instance, me as a city of Riga, and very different neighborhoods from my city, and some parts from metropolitan area, some villages, and some very, very far villages in the region, like Jaunpils, in the middle of, not nowhere, but in the middle of forests. And how Riga can benefit, how me as an officer from City Development Department can benefit. I can learn how to work with community, because smaller these societies, municipalities are more close to the people. Yes, they are. They can meet every day their people and work directly with the problems and challenges what they requested. In Riga, as a big city, is more like anonymous, because if you have 640,000 people and users is much more than 1 million for our city, it's not very easy to define stakeholders and work each day. Therefore, what we did, we did this. We introduce this neighborhood concept of neighborhoods, and divided city in 58 neighborhoods, and try to work with this communities. It's like it's more common to these smaller urbanities, Jonas says that it's very comfortable now in Germany, live in cities for 50 and 70,000 people. For instance, our bigger neighborhood is Purciems for 60,000 people. It could be the fourth biggest city in Latvia. And of course, therefore, this is how we think that we can work with the society, with the communities. More divided cities, smaller urbanities. So, and if we speak about rurality, urbanity, and this intermediate urbanity, yeah, in between, something in between. I probably I agree with Jonas. We have no tradition with inter things, because if we speak about urban area, it's of course it's a central city in metropolitan area, and then it's okay, polycentrical cities supported, satellite cities like Ogre, Sigulda, and I can say historical villages that is not very big, but they have this urban character and with different social different social services. But these areas that is very dense, urbanized in the last 2 decades, between city and the satellite cities and historical villages, to the former agricultural lands and former forests is not very good shape. They have bad faces. I don't know how it's better to explain in English, because they have no services. They have no good public transport infrastructure, social infrastructure. Even they have problems with ecology. And even if we speak about landscape architecture, it's like big monotonia. It's like America, and I'm not willing to live in there. Better probably live in very good flat in the city center, or of course in countryside, very nice own houses. But this intermediate things, I think, I don't know how it will be in future, but I'm afraid it is like a big bomb for us. But it's only places in Latvia that's growing. That is from other side.
Can I make a short comment? I mean, I think most in the audience know that I had an experience this year which was a bit crazy. So I ran for getting a mayor of my hometown, and apparently, Gunters, I need to really say it wasn't that punky as you probably hope. It was very boring. But we found out one thing, which was very disturbing and very aggressive, still working in me. My family knows that, and it's really working in me. I still don't have an answer on it. We found out that exactly these intermediate areas are the areas which are carrying, as you said, the bomb, the social and cultural bomb, the political bomb in them. When I was approaching these areas, I found all of these right-wing extremist thinking. I found all of this racism. I found all of this xenophobia. I found all of this anger, this deep-rooted anger. I didn't find it in the so-called deprived areas. Very interesting. I didn't find it in the very central areas or in the wealthy areas. You find it in this intermediate, this shadow, this gray, this what we also learned after Trump's election. These are the areas where people are exactly on this kind of edge of being afraid to lose something and being afraid to gain something, or the ability to gain something. So I very much share this idea of there is a bomb and we really have to concentrate on it. Yet I don't know how. I can't give any answers. Only one answer is for sure to go there, to listen and to talk to the people constantly as much as possible. But yes, I just wanted to say that because really it was an absolute proof of all of that, what you said. And I'm afraid the same can happen to Latvia as well.
I just wanted to say, not to be misunderstood, I'm not advocating for that dense intermediate stuff. No. I'm not saying that's a good thing and we all got to do this. I'm just saying it's there and we sort of have to deal with it. That's one thing. And I thought it was interesting that you said let's build it culturally, because I'm from upbringing, I'm architect and planner, and so we would have some ideas maybe about how to build it physically, or think about housing models or housing schemes or landscape, coming at it from the landscape and say, well, which patterns of landscape would you want to preserve? And I think that's already one issue. That is, if you would want to densify part of that intermediate stuff to give it more identity and also to make it more resilient in terms of connected better, because there's more people living there, then it's not only some but more, so that values some more services or better connections and all that. But that's already a good point, I guess, to connect it better and to treat it as to densify it in a way that it can become more compact, but it doesn't answer the question of cultural identity, and that's a total lack. And I thought what you said this morning, they said, well, it's about coolness also. It's a well, I don't know, power issue, but it's a self-esteem issue. Where do you live? Do we live in the big city, and that's sort of made it? At least that's a Central European connotation, quite valid one, I guess, or a German one, or maybe also here. So either that, or you can also argue for living in the countryside, because then you're off. If you're in between, you're sort of uncool, right? And that's and that makes you feel in a way that you then start possibly to react in a way that you just said. I just wanted to make the point that I'm not advocating. I'm just saying that's an issue. We got to deal with it. Yeah.
It is happening. And Guido, and I think continuing from what I already mentioned in the morning about this mentality of why the large cities, it's not just the infrastructure that brings people to large cities, it's the mentality of people who also want to live in large clusters, urban clusters. And what would be your take thinking about these social aspects of life and urbanities, and how if we do start standing up for these narratives of intermediate density urbanities, and we make smaller towns more noticeable and more present in political dialogue, what does that mean socially? Like, what does it mean to the mentalities of global population, thinking about how they are like living their lives in urban settlements, and what is the urban lifestyle in that case?
First of all, I have to say that I'm a bit uncomfortable with the use of the term mentality when talking about spatial planning and even community planning. I mean, I think it's been a bit overused in particular in a transition or post-transition, in this case, context. I don't think it's a matter of mentality in particular. I think that, first of all, some kind of complex scales, intermediate scales, complex partnerships between, which are, in between the urban and rural scale must be acknowledged, first of all. Their planning documents in Latvia very much mention urban-rural partnership. I mean, the centrality of urban-rural partnership. And I think some attempts have been done as mapping this possible urban-rural partnership and at proposing ad hoc policies for these partnerships. But I think that there is, even in documents, even at the normative level, too much of a strict dichotomy between the urban and the rural level. Sort of like there are the urban actors, the rural actors, and this partnership is a sort of interaction that, I mean, does not seem to have a sort of, how to say, a synergetic element that can bring something more than the sum of the parts. First of all, I think from the point of view of cultural and social identity, if this can answer to an extent to the question, identity is also embedded in this particular partnership. And these can be different different kinds of, let's say, seasonal urban to rural movements. It can be embedded within commuting experience. It can be embedded even in, let's say, industrial relations between rural and urban enterprises. So I think that the first step is to acknowledge all this plurality of interactions and which role can these perhaps intermediate areas also play, because they're often left out of the picture. Yeah, there is the metropolitan area, which is the main development pole, and the financial, cultural, and let's say, yeah, political center of the city, of the country. And then there is the rural culture, which is very, very dear to Latvian people, of course. But these intermediate, both these intermediate density areas and the plurality of urban-rural relationships are to an extent overlooked. This is one thing. The other issue is the compatibility between the governance level, so-called governance level. Because, of course, there are planning agencies, regional planning agencies, but there is no such thing, such a regional administrative level. So we have the national level and the municipality or Republican city level. And on the one hand, I think municipalities which have the same characteristics in terms of density tend to cooperate with each other with regard to some specific issues, even, I don't know, cultural projects and so on. But they have to rely on the main regional centers which have better infrastructure, better, I don't know, higher inflow of financial resources and so on. And, well, so these are often horizontal or vertical relationships that seem to lack governance. I mean, even in the specific case of Riga metropolitan area and Riga planning region, to manage something like transport management, commuting management from the, let's say, residential municipalities which are located around Riga. There has been strong suburbanization of the middle upper class from the city to the... if you look at GDP or net migration rate figures on a map of Latvia, you will see a sort of belt around Riga where there is better GDP per capita and, yeah, and positive net migration rate. So, I mean, even managing this sort of commuting dynamics and the traffic management purely at the municipal and national level is not particularly adequate, and there can be potential even conflicts of priorities between the municipal level and the planning regional level, which is not, I mean, which is an agency, not an institutional entity in the strict sense of the word. So yeah, there is an issue of acknowledgement and an issue of governance, in my opinion. This is what comes to my mind first. Okay, so I would like to Jonas to comment on this. Like once you were working on Urbact and the Change project, is this like do you think that by changing the approach and acknowledging these issues, which do you see as the most challenging aspects? And did you see that whether is there a thing that you could start working on immediately and attack it immediately? Either it's infrastructural questions, transportation questions, or governance questions. Do you see that regionally people would be already ready to make these changes, or is that also a very long dialogue and restructuring that is necessary
to be done.
As we know, I mean, it's just published for the 100 years of Latvia, has published some kind of book about the 100 most important kind of phrases in Latvia, and one of the phrases for sure is like, Latvia never talks to the neighbor. It was really disturbing to see that it's really mentioned there, but it's a famous phrase, yeah, okay. But I think it doesn't apply to Latvia. I think that's very normal wherever you go. That's a very normal thing. I mean, where we can start immediately, I just give you, I mean, since I understand always, like, the more we have been working with the Institute and with all of that, what we have done, specifically also on the kind of correlation between that, what is the city and what is the outskirts or the something in between. I said it already today lunchtime. I think most of all I will approach Margarita at that place like the suburbia. Not only in music way, but also like, but probably in music way. I mean, Suburbia was a great title. It was fantastic. It was an 80s song. It really crashed. It like smashed us all of us. However, we were punk or pop or whatever. We loved the song. But there is one thing. I'm living in this kind of place. So I'm commuting. You are commuting as well. When I'm looking on my commuting process, it's an approximate 1 hour bus drive, can be a little bit less regarding, with respect to traffic. And people are coming from the bus starts in Tulsi, which is like far more out, and then somewhere it picks up me, and then it turns to the more, say, dense structure. And what I find is people are stepping in the bus. When they step in the bus, they immediately either put on the headphones or headset, or they fall asleep. And for sure, they're always in their jackets. So you take your privacy, your my home is my castle, your security, your comfort zone, you take it with you, bring it in the bus, and you don't leave it in the bus. And you pass through the suburbia. This is what I mean with the culture. You pass through the suburbia, and you just don't acknowledge, you don't recognize, you don't do anything. It just passes by the outside. Beautiful places, interesting places, lively places. But you just blind, sleeping, warm packed in a super overheated bus, I have to say. It's like, usually the buses have like 23, 24 degrees in the winters, and you're like, you're sweating, but still everybody sits there, including my children. They also don't have the same habit. Yeah, they don't take off their coats and so on, and then immediately clock. That's it. That's how you go through suburbia. And that's how you go through all these intermediate places. So how do we make the place, and how do we make this passage as a more, how to say, I wouldn't even talk about identity immediately. I would talk most of all about, I agree there very much with Guido, I would first of all talk about the idea of make it interesting. So if we have a stand-up comedian in the bus every morning and every afternoon, and the person, somebody like Kristaps, he loves like stand-up comedians, and he is a perfect stand-up comedian. So like somebody like Kristaps is like commuting in the morning, commuting in the evening, don't show a tongue. And he would like entertain the people. Or maybe like myself, I also love to be a stage diva. So then you could really like do something. You could really like stimulate people to, hey, look outside. See that? Hey, there. Ah, look. Oh. Yeah, interesting. This is Bigonsiems. That's where I'm living. Yeah, it has 800 inhabitants. It's completely nonsense. Yeah, there is a huge GDP gap, actually, to be honest. On the one side of the street, there's living all the incomers for the last like 5 years, like building huge palaces. On the other side, there are the fishermen with like a GDP, which is like jokeable even in Povtzims. Yeah, you don't want to think about that. So this is, you could do something, but I want to say one point that strikes me after Guntas was mentioning it. I do see, not only because of the Change project, but I do see really a mentality, an interest, You don't like metality, I'm sorry. I see an I do see an interest growing in our communities. Suddenly, for the last 2 years, something is happening. Something is changing. People start to invest more, I mean time, culture, interest, more in their locality of the living place. And not immediately running to Riga, or in our case, maybe running to Jurmala in order to get some cultural joy or something, I don't know, whatever it might be. I mean, only looking on the festivities of the schools, the annual things of the schools are always like the most important things. Yeah. So, and since we still have school children, we are like constantly there. Suddenly, there are like hundreds of people. There are really many people. It's like getting much more hip, interesting. Something starts to develop in these places, and I think to give an answer on that, we need to a little bit let it grow also. Just by itself. It's not us always intervening. I think the transportation is not the worst, actually. There are some very bad places, but generally it's possible. It's going, it's developing, it's okay. It's not easy, but I think something is on the verge.
And I think, Ute, maybe if you can put in some examples from the research that you've started, which is obviously still in development, but how do you make these, how do people make these intermediate density places interesting? How do they find them interesting? What is this process? Do you have examples that you've come across of how we start thinking about these places?
Well, actually, I was just thinking when you told that story that what you were describing with people commuting from the outskirts into Riga, this is still, in a way, the sort of the major narrative. My point would be that in the areas that I was showing before in the south of Germany, that's not the only pattern anymore. Exactly. Yeah. Actually, people do it vice versa. They would live in the large knot and commute out. So as long as you have that pattern that you really have, like, I'm just, to make the point, that you have the large area, that the magnet that sucks it all up, well, quite obviously, everything around is sort of suburban and has the problems we have heard about. So I don't have any recipes in that sense. We just started to see, and that might be also a bit different somehow in these large corridors in Belgium and Netherlands and northern Italy and from here. I don't know that. You have to tell me. But that in the area. I was showing the German example, this is not the only pattern. It might not even be the main narrative, because it goes, and there's very little research on, because people assume that this would be the pattern, that they obviously they go to work in the larger city in the morning and they come back, but that's not always the point, because it really depends on how commerce and business is distributed, so I would say it's not. Well, first of all, it's not a speech for saying, well, the intermediate density or however you call it, that in between stuff is good or anything. It's just it's something we got to work with, and we got to be conscious. I would say that the quantitative aspect is very similar, but the qualitative aspect might be really different, But one more point, reacting to you, I think it's a cultural issue, we said, and it's about how you what kind of physical response do you have to that. But more than anything, I think it's a governance issue, because it's always running across border. It's never ever in one area. And it touches, borders, and then you're lost. So I thought, what I'm going to take home from here is that idea to break it down on the neighborhood level, sort of really like the pixel. I said, well, once these, like the small scale cluster has a stability or a social stability or works, and you compose, your city, whatever, with these somehow functional or socially stable, or however you want to call it, neighborhoods. That's something that's also very interesting, that doesn't need a governance intervention in a way. But if you're not building it on this, and sort of, if you intervene I'm quite convinced that half of your energy is into governance. And not in the sense we have to introduce a regional level, one more planning institutional level, or institutionalize it, or I don't really believe in that so much, but other procedures because that's a necessity anyway, to involve more and more stakeholders into processes of development. So if you're conscious that you want to and find ways how to involve stakeholders and have not total bottom up, but also a bottom up dynamics in developments, then borders don't matter that much anymore. So this is just an impulse more than a.
And Gunther, as you've been referred to as the father of neighborhoods, then what's your intake like of the grassroots activities that people come up with themselves, and how does that help you to work, and not just the neighborhoods in Riga, but also on the fringes of Riga and just outside of Riga?
Yes, the interesting. What kind of people lives outside of Riga and in Riga? It's totally different. Yes, I'm commuting every day from metropolitan area, from one nice city, and at the evening, at the holidays, I saw it's building new houses. We have new kindergartens, new shops, and I think how long it will continue, and maybe it's from 10 city will be to 20,000 city and more, and will be this comfortable 50,000 city, maybe not, yes. And yes, and in the previous question, what you ask, what we can change to manage this situation, what I see in Kekava municipality is that they, my colleagues, understand that they spoiled the last decades these places, but they recognize it and try to change what they can. This is very important to change behavior. It's very, very good with education, but we have in Latvian University, because new planners go and work here. On other municipality, very close to the Riga, I don't know, can I mention this, but maybe you recognize from Latvia. I speak with a major of this municipality because I see her strategy. No, they have 16,000 people, and their strategy is 30,000 people. It's I asked him, but people who are moving from Riga, they are not urban style people. Okay, they are not very old, it's middle class, but they are willing to live in like countryside atmosphere. But they don't know that after first stage of the urbanization project will be second, third, fourth stage. Because yes, one of my friends live here, and I'm not visiting him 3 or 4 years, and then I'm trying to visiting and come to find, because it's micro rayon of Riga. It's not this smaller municipality. This major said me, no, they are working in Riga, therefore probably they like urban style, not country style. They drinking only cognac at the evening. They not need this cows and all this agricultural stuff. So what happens with these territories? Yes, in Riga, and it is problem in Latvia. You can't see it in Barcelona and in Berlin. We must educate young generation, even in schools, that urban still living is not a bad thing, actually. Yes, it's of course you have, in liberal world you can choose if you are willing to go to the countryside, live here. But urban style, it's not living in Riga. It's not because you have to live here because it's better for you have more opportunities for education, for work, but it must build this like you love to live here, because very nice place is much more opportunities to meet, more intense of culture here in the cities than you can see, for instance, in Salaspils or in other parts in agglomeration. So, and this is how these grassroots activities are, and movement of neighborhoods and the young generation are happening here. And for me as a planner in the future, because we have these declining trends in the city became a more pure and less inhabited, yes, but what we put in the strategy is that we are willing to bring back a new generation from metropolitan area. It's people are moving, middle class, they have 2 or 3 kids, and I suppose they are not all live all life in this intermediate urban spaces. And we must to build city very attractive as young generation requests, and they can and we can attract this population. This is how I see this neighborhood movement and behavior of urban or not urban style of living. And probably people who are went to these places and dreaming about countryside, and again they have a micro area, and maybe they're moving more to countryside, or maybe they return to the city because cities would be more livable.
And moving to closing arguments, and I think it would be very nice to hear some questions and comments from the audience here as well. But Guido, if you would, if there are these problems that we've acknowledged, and we know that it's the governmental structures, the infrastructure structures, but what is the good practice that perhaps you've read about, or maybe what is your suggestions of how to approach these matters?
Well. I mean, I think there are really there is a large plurality of possible outcomes, and coming back to the issue of identity, a plurality of identities that we can identify in the non-metropolitan space, because we have, I mean, Latvia has a path dependency from history. It has had historically in the 20th century ideologically different special planning policies that had a strong, ideological footprint. I say it in a neutral way, but I mean, it was special planning that implied also some sort of social engineering. Then in the 90s, there's been a reaction, a sort of rejection of special planning as a whole, and then moving back to practices that anyway have to take into account. Why I'm saying this? Because you can have, even in the same municipality, in the same village, as Jonas has mentioned, the fishermen and the newcomers of the last years who can have, an urban culture, for instance, and probably they make the place more hip at some point. But do the fishermen agree with this?
Yes, interesting enough.
Okay, so this is this is perhaps this could be a best practice. I mean, in which way do the newcomer affect and interact with the local? Let's say rural culture. I mean, this is fisherman culture, but I mean, then we have industrial or former industrial small cities that probably fall exactly within this intermediate density typology, and in this case, well, if there is, of course, industrial activity still working, they probably have some sort of slightly better economic performance than other municipalities. But in that case, I think the issue is mostly related to diversification, to amenities, to recreational activities, because, I mean, an industrial city in Latvia in the 1970s or 80s is a completely different context than now, and it can struggle making sense. I mean, you can see it in all probably European countries that have moved from say socialism to capitalism. So in the end, there's an issue of identity and possible alienation of these areas, unquestionably. And I think this is something that has to be addressed not in a purely economic way. I mean, of course, there are economic issues, but there is also an issue of making quality of life better in an holistic way. Yeah, that's what I will say. So these are some of the aspects. I cannot summarize under a single label, but I think policymakers have to be aware of the plurality of identities and experiences which are shaped by local history and national history, probably. And I can add that we were talking about resilience earlier. So if there is a way of strengthening resilience and improving cohesion, territorial cohesion, which is said to be a, let's say, necessary component of sustainability, of sustainable development. Well, then another issue is not to let local culture and local activities die, because it's not just folklore. It can be specific economic activity which can be more resilient than globalized activity to systemic crisis. So I think a less superficial support to local culture and all the possible even economic externalities of local culture, I don't know, everything ranging from vocational schools to small businesses, to art, to craftsmanship, and so on. I mean, it's something that cross-border cooperation programs, I mean, with Estonia, with Lithuania, Baltic Sea region in general, are usually addressing. And I think, these programs allow coordination of different administrative units, even across borders. So, I mean, those who have assessed these programs with regard to these local development initiatives have a generally positive assessment of how they addressed, and now I will use the word mentality, because they addressed institutional mentality to go across borders, exchanging best practices, providing synergies. So yeah, sometimes this systemic way of thinking can also help acknowledging local resources and yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add about resilience? I think it's you emphasize a very important thing, because resilience is how the place react to the global challenges in the future. And I suppose that after 10-15 years, approximately 50% of professions will not be necessary anymore. And maybe it's not be necessary anymore to commute to big city or yeah, and we don't know what will happen and how the place will be resilient. And maybe in that case, identity of this place will play a much bigger role. That people are choose places where it's more interesting for living. Not it's more related to the work. I suppose it's one of the aspects.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I want to come back to that what Ute said earlier, just to emphasize it again. After you just mentioned it, Guntas, I think certainly the idea of how to invest in regionality and rurality is something that you could probably take back to Southwest Germany. I mean, this is one thing that for sure we have, since we have, what, 23 inhabitants per square kilometer in general in this country. which is less than a joke for Central European circumstances. But what we can take back from your presentation is how we can actually much more build out exactly what you just said. I mean, let's look up north, the direction, like Sigulda, Cesis, Milton, Valmiera, this kind of direction. I mean, there is already, for example, an intermunicipal cooperation existing, the triangle, yeah, between Cesis, Valmiera, and Smiltene. They actually are actively doing something, and and already we find, for example, in one of the places in Valmiera, like really, as you mentioned it today, you didn't mention it now, but I mean, the area that Ute was describing is hosting some of the most important companies in the world. It's not just like they are leading competitors. They are really like in their kind of field. They are like in automobile and high technology and whatever. Like there are many companies. And we have the same, like look on Valmiera. I mean, we have one of the biggest companies in Latvia, like the Stickles company there is like really important. And you see that there is something that we actually probably can build these kind of bands a little bit more intensively. And this is what we can do really top down in a planning issue also. We have the ability to work on that on a national level. It's not the city council, it's not even the region, it's really the national level that has to do that. And I think if we emphasize that more, then we also have an ability in both ways to work really on it.
Yeah, and I think also going back to what Guido said is recognizing these new potentials. It's very important to still think about what sort of changes it brings and what sort of plurality we're able to recognize and how we are dealing with it, so we don't destroy the already existing Zvejniek, the fishermen. Who are already there with innovation and new ideas of what we should do with these areas. Do we have any questions from the room of people who have worked with the? Yeah, perfect.
Let's take this one. Not really.
What I am thinking about last time. Thank you. First, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I think it is a very actual discussion. What I'm a bit in terminological terms. We are speaking about rural and urban. For me, urban was always the synonymous to human settlement. So, I mean, I think this rural and urban using this like autonomous, yeah, it is outdated. Yeah, in Soviet time, I remember very good. I was small, and it was in Lozong, yeah. The dissolving border between village and town. I mean, they didn't succeed, and I think nobody succeeded. But who succeeded? Last 10 years, maybe technologies. Your fishermen, yeah, are not different from the people who are living in the city. They have the same technologies and the social media, so you see, you're connected to everybody. You have this image of what is good, on what you like, what you don't like. Yeah. So the question about do you like city life or do you like village life? It is not the question anymore. Yeah. And the people who are living in the city, they are choosing also the spots which are more quiet and more pleasant. So there are different criteria, not rural and urban. That is one. I think we have to rethink and to start to think about more proper use of this term. No? Another one about mentality. So Guido said that he doesn't like mentality. I wake up, immediately woke up, said, yes, I don't like it also. So it is not that we abused it, I agree. But there is another term. We can't find another term for that because it is something beyond the visible features which we can name. Yeah, I found very useful in this respect term of Pierre Bourdieu habitus, because mentality is something what is related to cognition, yeah, to thinking, but our life is very few points related to cognition and reflection. We are doing a lot of things automatically. So, and I would like to propose, or I find much more suitable the terms habitus, where inside these rituals and habits, and which create structures, and where we all create structures as a collective body, and we are influenced by this structure also. This and the third thing, it is also my pain. I think it is about small places, small human settlements which are dying out, and I think it is very much a result of economic and blah, blah, blah factors, and globalization, urbanization, and hyper cities. And I think it is a result of this glorifying of meritocracy. Very much. Yeah. So, yeah. So I mean, in very past, the competition was between in Olympic Games, yeah, between the strongest, the fittest, but not most intellectual, maybe. And today, competition transferred, extrapolated to the normal life. Yeah, competition between places where you live. What the hell is competition? So the key word is empathy. You can live wherever you want to live. Why this place is better than another? I think it is a very dangerous thing. Yeah, it is a very dangerous thing in these strategies also, because all cities are writing strategies. We are the best. Yeah, they make this city the most nicer or wealthy city in the Latvia. If you will be the most, what is about other cities? Yeah. So this comparison with other, somebody of you mentioned this. 17 and the strategy wants 30. Yeah, why? Why 30? Maybe it is better to say today 17. Yeah, but in 10 years 10. Because it's a very nice place to live. You have to really be a very good person to come here. So, I mean, there are 3 points I was concerned. Thank you very much again.
Maybe somebody else
wants to refer.
Just give it to the audience. Yeah. I was just going to say, I totally agree with that definition, saying, well, it doesn't really make sense if you talk about urban or rural. That would be the whole point. And also, I mean, there was one aspect we haven't talked about so much, because that seems not to happen yet in Latvia. What we experience in Germany, at least, or like other places, obviously as well, is that you don't have to ask people to come to the city anymore. They're pouring into it. Which results in real estate prices that are just ridiculous. Whether they live there or they just buy it is another story. But that hype of, like, it's really cool to be in the city. We are the best. No, we are the best. No, we are even much more wealthy and much more better on the globe. And we have the largest growth dynamics or something. That's what I meant at the very beginning, that this picture of we are so used to, these are the growth magnets, this is also a political magnet, in one way giving responsibility supposedly to these large growing areas. That's right, and it's also all right that they would feel responsible and do something about it. But on the other hand, it's also an image, C40 or however you want to call them, saying we are the main attractors. Who, is there anybody else? Well, I don't see anybody else. that sort of attitude. So I think in that respect, it really helps to, in a way, get rid of this this opposition of rural and urban. But if you, at least in my country, the policy is addressed to either or. It's either about urban development, that's what they know how to do, and they have ministries for that. Well, they don't have, but they have channels and clear policies of how you really develop an urban, compact, well-connected, resilient type of city. And they have their money for the rural areas, which is more of protection or support for agriculture or whatnot. But it's two worlds. They tend not to talk, well, never ever.
The European Commission is divided.
It's divided everywhere. So, and I'm quite sure if you balance what you were just describing, if you somehow want to balance things and not have it pour into the big magnets, but not have it spread uncontrollably either, you need some sort of arrangement, maybe not official, well, however, I think that can depend very much on the specific case, but you need some sort of communication and other governance, dialogue arrangements, because otherwise, and you maybe also need an idea of what you could, put in there. Is it education, or what are your main arguments? How could you, without forcing or trying to force people through planning, and this is how we do it, and you got to go there, but through smart intervention, what elements could you put, somewhere to trigger a development that you might want to have, because it's resilient in a way. I don't know if I make myself clear.
Very short comment on that, because Guntas was earlier talking about education, and you said about urban education in schools. Come on, this is like, I'm praying that for. I love it. I love it. When I'm looking on our place, I don't know, when my daughter started with geography lessons, it was probably 7th class or 6th class? 7. I started in the 40 years ago, even more. I started in the 3rd class with geography. Why do we wait so long for that? Because this is the tool where we can actually place it, where we can place this idea of what does it mean, a settlement? I'm talking about really geography settlement series. What is a settlement? What does it mean for us? How do we map? How do we allocate? How do we see? We could start in the kindergarten, for God's sake. It was even, children would benefit from it. And instead of that, we start in the 6th or 7th class. It's a nightmare. Those boys and girls don't know anything about their environment. That's, Helena.
Sorry, I jumped in maybe too much. That is reflection to you, what I forgot to say, that, I think that we have to find, we planners have to find a language more appropriate to speak about society, about people. I don't think we succeed in that as planners. Sustainability, resilience, yeah. Sorry, I'm not resilient. It's nothing about solidarity, nothing about compassion, nothing about love. So I found the word empathy, which are popping up now. I think if we as planner can introduce in our language other terms, not that based on the quantitative things, actually resilience and sustainability are quantitative things, more or less. So that is, I think we have to look for, we speak what we think and what we feel.
Yeah. Do you want to add something?
Yeah. I think that there is something perhaps uncomfortable that I will say now, but what you mentioned, in my opinion, correctly, as this emphasis on competition, this is not something that is considered backwards by the common sense. This is actively championed by the European Commission, the European Union. This is something that we have to acknowledge. It's not the result of a backward mentality. It's something that is very fashionable now and it's considered up to date. So once this is not challenged, I mean, it's very difficult to find space for other. I mean, the idea that cities and regions can lag behind in case they do not have development strategies, which is true, has been transformed into a sort of normative approach to planning that emphasizes, I don't know, city branding, city marketing, and so on. But yeah, this is the current trend, not everywhere. I'm not saying that everybody in Brussels agrees with this, but I mean, the synthesis is this thing, because it's easier to probably to measure.
Still in rational planning era, still today. We
Yeah.
said that modernism is bad, but it's not. We are living every day in that. All the government system in Latvia absolutely vertical. And how we think about it and how we speak about things, it's only past the last century, so we don't change it.
Yeah. I mean, with regard to the urban-rural divide, I think that if you look at the history of Latvia, whatever you think about these different planning periods, there has always been a dynamic between the urban and the rural. They were not separated. I mean, interaction between urban and rural culture was important for the ideology of first independent Latvia. Urban-rural relationships were also very important for Soviet ideology because, I mean, there were application of garden city principles, some often failed, but I mean, anyway, I mean, some often failed, less often successful. But I mean, in general, there was the idea that there was an attempt as creating, I don't know, at reducing urban-rural, let's say, social status divides and so on, at least in theory. So there has always been a problematic approach to the urban-rural divide. The idea of creating this divide, in my opinion, it may seem a paradox. Of creating this normative divide is rather recent, probably. Yeah, this is something that, I mean, perhaps we should try to understand why it is so, because, yeah, nobody erased these differences, these social, economic, cultural differences, but yeah.
But nobody also studied really, isn't there a difference in which are these differences? So, I mean, was in Belgium together with us, we went, sorry, the story that is Indra's talking instead of me. Indra come to visit us in Belgium, and we are driving along the rural Belgian area, and they just stand in one farm and house, and Indra say, "Wow, I want to live there in this house," because that is not like in Latvia, just broken house, somewhere in the middle of the field. That is normal, a modern house with all facilities, staying with the nicest view in nicest landscape settings. I mean, where is rural and where is, so in Belgium, no rural anymore. So that's garden city, the whole garden city, Nebelstadt.
Okay, I think we have used up all of our time, unless we have any comments from anyone else in the audience. I think we could wrap it up. Do you have any final comments that you would like to add? No? Then we can continue.
I still have one, but I think that's related to something afterwards.
Okay. Yeah. So there is still time for informal discussions after the discussion. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for taking part in this, and Merry Christmas. I don't know.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, but I need to make some kind of statement now, and I would very much love to see Indra. Where are you? Where's Indra? Yeah, please come here. Because I mean, there is something we haven't been announcing yet, really, and I think it's necessary to make it finally as a statement. Annette was doing that so nicely, a little bit like I joined the Institute. Let's be very honest and frank, it's not like just joining the Institute. Indra and Annette are the new board of the Urban Institute. So therefore, we are finally resolved. So I really thank you very much that you are on board. Thank you.